Hello, everyone, and welcome to Voice and Vision's Help and Hope webinar series. We're so glad that you've joined us today. Hopefully you're safe and well where you are, as it's snowing where most of us are, I think. I'm Valerie Melroy, and I'll be your host for today. So our webinar series today is on what is family engagement and learning strategies for supporting families and their loved ones in recovery and beyond. I'm particularly excited about this topic because I myself am a family member of a person who has substance use disorders, and I've learned to walk the walk along with that person and that individual through the difficult times and the good times, and it's been a blessing, even when it's been very hard. So I'm so excited that Trish Caldwell is here with us today, and she's really going to talk about, so what is family engagement? And what are strategies for supporting our families in recovery and beyond? And Mark Christmeyer, who was supposed to be here today, is unable to be so, but Kathleen Morris Rosati has joined us, and she'll be telling us her personal story. So thank you so much, Trish and Kathleen. We're so happy to have you here. And we would like to thank Magellan Healthcare because they sponsored us for this webinar today. And without them, we wouldn't have it. So thank you. Do you have a copy of Help and Hope? Help and Hope is our book series from families who have walked the walk. And individuals, family members, and professionals have shared their expertise and their experience in our series books. The one we're talking from today is Substance Use, the Growing Need to Know. We would like to get a copy in your hands, so please contact Karen Plummer or Maria at that number, or you can go into our website. And also you can get the book for free and download a copy. It's 300 pages. You may not want to do that, but it is on our website. So please visit our website. There's lots of tips in this book as you walk through this journey, or as someone else walks through this journey. We would absolutely love to have you get a copy in your hand. If you need more than one, we do have some cases that we can get to your whole organization. So please let us know how we can help you get that information into your hands. So the webinar today will be about 90 minutes long. We'll have the presentations and then a Q&A. The information here is to share with individual and family members the benefits of a multifaceted recovery support system. Family supports being one of those components. Now, Voice and Vision, we're not clinicians, so we're encouraging you as you walk through your journey to find professionals, clinicians, therapists, other support systems to help you, because it always works better when you're with a team. So establish a recovery support team around you, and we can help you do that if you need to. So please give us a call. Chris, we're so happy to have you here. You contributed to the book, and we're excited about that. So please get that book. Well, Trish Caldwell today, as our speaker, is the Senior Vice President of Clinical Services for Recovery Centers of America. She is also an adjunct professor at Jefferson University and a certified trauma trainer contracted by Lakeside Global Institute. A therapist for over 27 years, she is a licensed clinician and marriage and family therapist. Additionally, Trish created the first young offenders treatment program in Delaware County. She also created the unique family programming, Seeds to Recovery, offered to families impacted by substance use. A regular speaker at both national and regional conferences, Trish specializes in adolescent behaviors and the family systems, substance use and co-occurring disorders, including ADHD, trauma-informed care, and the impact of trauma in first responders and their families. Thank you so much for being here, Trish. Take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate it. This is a topic that is always near and dear to my heart. I am, again, currently the Senior Vice President of Clinical Services at Recovery Centers of America, and spend a tremendous amount of my time making sure that we are involving the families from all levels of care throughout the entire treatment process, because we know the importance of families being a part of the recovery, when for so many of them, the only language that they had learned was that language of addiction. And so this is a really important topic to me. Again, I appreciate you having me and being a part of the conversation on how to get our families to be involved and empowered in the healing process of recovery. So the objectives, again, I'm not going to highlight the objectives. These are going to be exactly what it is that I cover, so I'm not going to spend time on talking about that. But as we start to go through this, in the time that I have been spending, I'm not going to show you the video, so don't worry. But in the time that I have been working with families, so oftentimes I would talk about it in a way that I felt like the families were the forgotten patient. And I say that because for so many of the individuals that we are treating, there's an entire system of recovery that's waiting on the outside. And so I consider that kind of the forgotten patient, because when we're really looking at what it is that we're trying to do, we use the phrases, an addiction is a family disease and recovery is supposed to be a part of, the healing process for everybody. But so oftentimes we don't involve the families in that recovery process. And so when I talk about it in regards to, what we provide within an inpatient and an outpatient level of care, I use the phrases a lot when I'm speaking to our own staff, even of families have only learned the language that they've been living. And as a result of the experiences that they've endured, they start to change the way that they behave in response to a life-threatening illness. When somebody comes into our treatment space, we are teaching them a brand new language. They are having to learn how to speak this new language of recovery. But if we don't involve the families, then when our patients are learning this new language of recovery, and our families don't know that language, that when their loved one comes back home and they start speaking a new language, without the family having simultaneously learned it, they will continue to learn the only language that they've learned, which is that language of addiction. And so we oftentimes see families that are trying to find their own ways through their experiences to try and help somebody that they love. But if you learn a new language and you go into an environment that nobody is speaking the same language as you, eventually you stop trying and you go back to what you know, which is the language that you had together. So for me, that's the importance of bringing the families in. We want to start to provide them an opportunity to understand this new language of recovery so that when they are joined with their loved one, they're speaking the exact same language. And so again, when we think about the importance of family, addiction is a disease of isolation. The healing process of this disease is through the connection to others. I fundamentally believe that. So again, in the Seeds to Recovery program that we offer at RCA, which is open to our families as well as to any family that's been impacted by the disease of addiction, we know that healing begins when people feel connected. And because of the way that this has been viewed historically, families are given minimal tools to figure out, so what do I need to do? Right? Families are oftentimes told if they're enabling or they're codependent and all of these words that they don't know what to manage it with. What do you want me to do with that? When everybody begins to learn the connection, the importance of connection, when families start to learn that it's okay to be afraid and still have hope, when families learn that it's okay to be angry and still have love, and when families are given the tools to figure out what their role is in the recovery process and what it is not, it allows for them to surrender to that idea of staying connected to your person and disconnecting from the disease. That's where we get caught up. And so hopefully at the end of this, you'll have some recognition as to the way that you are able to either support yourselves and your families if you are a provider, or if you are a family member, ways that you can get yourself involved in the recovery process that would allow for your own healing to begin and subsequently support your loved ones. So again, I am grateful that I was able to be a part of Voice and Vision's family involvement project in the book. And so I'm going to utilize some of the data, because I will say I use this data when I'm training our own sites and our own team members, because I think it's incredibly important for us to recognize the importance. Because sometimes, again, when people don't have honest conversations about this, what can happen is we start to make assumptions as providers as to why the family's not involved. And so in the research that they had done, again, family involvement in mental health and drug and alcohol treatment and recovery, how do we evaluate and grow from the findings? So when we start to explore what the findings came out with, the need for family involvement. So again, we continue to say those things, right? It's a family disease and we want to make sure that we're treating everybody, but are we doing what it is that we say that we need to do in order to help the healing process begin? So in the research that was done by Voice and Vision, of the 496 people interviewed who were asked, who do you turn to for support? 74% reported that they turned to their family. So here's what that means. When we are talking about family involvement, and I'm talking about the language of addiction versus the language of recovery, what this is indicating is that when a crisis occurs, the number one place that somebody goes is their family. So we are recognizing that our families are oriented towards the crisis. What I will say is when I came to RCA 5 years ago, and I started saying, listen, we're going to start making phone calls preemptively with our families. We're going to call them within the admissions process. We're going to call them 72 hours later. You know, a lot of staff were like, why would we do that? And I prepared them to say, listen, when you call, I want you to be aware there's a very good chance that when the family answers, they're going to say, what's wrong? Because they are so accustomed to only being involved in the crisis. 74% of those struggling report they go to a family for support. During the 2014-15 recovery survey, and 15 and 16 people were asked what helps them to prevent a crisis. 40% said family and friends and other important relationships. So to me, family is whoever has your back in the ability to find and maintain long-term meaningful recovery from whatever it is that you're recovering from. And when people were asked what's helping them to prevent the crisis, over 80% replied contact with family and friends. So what I want to continue to emphasize is when we see, and again, I'm going to say, I'm not a fan of the word enabling a codependency, right? Words have meaning to me. And when we say these things to families, we're basically telling them, stop doing these things that's hurting them, right? There's even the phrase of like, you're loving your loved one to death. What a horrible thing to say to a family member when they don't know how to do this different, because their world has actually been cycled around the crisis. So when treatment begins, that's when the family needs to begin to get involved, to learn how they support their own and their loved ones' recovery. But based on this data, and there's other data to support this, what we know for certain is that those are struggling go to their families when they're in crisis. That's why families get caught in the crisis, because they are attempting to help somebody that they love battle and save them from this chronic illness. When we look at, again, the findings, a large percentage of people, so somewhere between 70 to 88%, depending on the project, say they reach out to families, right, which is what we just talked about. At the same time, we hear from the individuals and the families that they are often marginally involved in the treatment process. And so again, as a person that is not a fan of the words enabling and codependency, because those are just words that we give to people that we don't help them to understand what they can do differently, this is an example of that. If families are only marginally involved in the recovery, but they are overwhelmingly involved in the crisis, then how would we expect families to begin their own recovery? That would be the equivalency of us having somebody come into our treatment space and saying, just stop using, knock it off. We know that that's not sufficient. We know that they need to be invested in a treatment space. We know that they need to be, engaged in recovery efforts, that they need support to learn this new language. This is the same for our families. And when they continue to do the research, most families were saying that they wished it hadn't taken them so long to learn about available services and supports and how to best support their family members. What that says is that they're not trying to do the wrong thing. There's nobody I have met that was hoping that they were going to love their loved one to death. I wish that somebody had told me, was what I hear from families all the time. I wish somebody had sat down with me and said, these are some things that might be better suited for your loved one and for your recovery. I wish somebody told me I needed my own recovery, because for so many families, they think this is what they are supposed to do is all about their loved one. But I say this frequently. This is the only disease that families feel responsible for. This is the only disease that families think if they do something, they're going to cure it. Imagine your loved one with any other chronic illness, diabetes, cancer, anything. And you thinking that if you yelled at them enough, they would get rid of it. If you let go enough, you would get rid of it. If you watched everything that they did, that you would get rid of it. That if you screamed, if you practiced, protection, if you would know better. You'd be like, I can't get rid of that for them. My job is to love them and to have hope that they can change. My job is to let them know, keep fighting. I believe in you. But this is the only disease that families think, if I do this, I will save them. And that's not how this works. But what we know is when families stay connected to their person and they begin to experience that healing, we see greater success. In the same way that we see greater success for individuals that are battling other chronic illnesses who have somebody and a strong support system. That even on the worst days when there's a reoccurrence of somebody's presentation of a disease, that people don't stop and give up on them, that people start to say, I'm scared, but I believe that you can still fight this. That's the shift in our families. So engaging in meaningful and sustainable recovery, that the important piece, and I'm going to say, having spoken to a lot of families over the course of the years, I am a strong advocate for families to understand how to advocate for themselves. So we do have releases of information. There's no question about that. We need to have permission from loved ones to be able to have conversations with family members. But family members can continue to support the idea of, how do I get involved? So if we have somebody and they email me and say, I haven't heard from anybody, our job internally is to make sure we're having honest conversations with their loved ones about long-term meaningful recovery. Because the reality is, no provider is able to get somebody sober. No provider is able to manage somebody's recovery. Long-term meaningful recovery happens in the context of the community and the families to which somebody lives. That's where real recovery happens. We are a huge catalyst to that recovery process, but it happens outside of our doors. So when you start looking at understanding the risks and vulnerability of how mental health issues and trauma increase the likelihood of substance use disorder, so education, understanding and identifying key factors needed to engage families in their treatment process, and that families are oftentimes not engaged in the treatment of their loved one. And as providers and families, we need to explore and better understand how we can engage families that would promote recovery. And so that is equal responsibility of us as providers and also as families. How do we get ourselves to be involved in the recovery process? And so I want to be super clear. And again, this is what we know to happen. Families, in the attempt to try and save somebody, families will call treatment providers. Families will say, you need to do this, and you need to do this, and you need to do this. The role of a family member, and that's part of where treatment comes in, is getting them involved in what their recovery looks like so that they can support their loved ones. Let me be super clear. Families cannot get their loved ones sober. Families cannot manage somebody else's recovery from whatever they are recovering from. Families can't do that. What families can do is find ways that they can support their own recovery by getting involved in programs like this, by getting involved in Seeds to Recovery, by getting involved in the weekly education that we offer every Tuesday evening, by getting involved in Al-Anon, by getting involved, that's your recovery. If your loved one was diagnosed with any other chronic illness, you wouldn't spend all of your time trying to eradicate something that you have no control over. You would start figuring out, how do I take care of myself so that I can be a resource for their journey, so that I can be okay. That's the shift. So oftentimes, what do we see as barriers? We see for some families the shame of, how did we get here? I work with a lot of young adults and family members that are like, I don't know how this happened to us. I don't know how we got here. There's families that I have seen that have their own recovery efforts that they're attempting to do, whether they have managed it or not, whether it's mental health or whether it is substance use, that they feel that this is their fault. And so it oftentimes can prevent them from wanting to engage in the recovery efforts. That fear, anger, feeling overwhelmed by the fear of losing someone. That learned helplessness I see with somebody that needs multiple treatment episodes, I start seeing the learned helplessness within the families. It doesn't matter what I do. They keep doing the same things. And that my answer is, because it's nothing that you're doing. Because this is theirs. And every time somebody accesses treatment, they're increasing their rate of success. Learned helplessness is when you believe, you start to have so much fear that you lose hope. When families are in their own recovery, then we want to make sure, don't ever lose hope. In the same way that if your loved one was battling any other chronic illness and they had multiple reoccurrences of their symptoms, we don't want you to lose hope. Because hope is the gateway for somebody to continue to fight to beat this. And we know for certain that recovery does and can happen every single day. We know that there's some professional barriers. And so again, whether you are a professional listening to this or whether you are a family member, that sometimes the professionals have their own struggles with involving families. So they might have fear of just doing family work. They might feel overwhelmed by it. That they don't feel families might be healthy, right? So quote unquote healthy. That when I have a family member, and so if I were to give an example, when we look at families of young adults, we look at parents that are very engaged, right? You weren't even done raising your child, and now your child is battling this life-threatening illness. And so you think in the same way that you do when you have a small child that runs out into the middle of the street, I'm just going to scoop you up and I'm going to protect you. And so I'm going to be angry, I'm going to be controlling, I'm going to have all of these things that I'm going to say to you. And so professionals sometimes will deem that as unhealthy. We're treatment providers. We understand that behaviors exist for a reason. So we should never be deeming behaviors as unhealthy. We can look at behaviors in a way that help us to understand behaviors that support recovery or support addiction. And so when I speak with families, I say that all the time. Every action that we engage in does one of two things. It either protects the disease or it supports the recovery. And so I want you to ask, which one am I doing right now? When a family member calls and demands to have certain things, I'm not angry at that. I get it. But what are you doing right here? Are you protecting the disease by trying to control it? Or are you supporting the recovery by trying to help your loved one figure out how to maintain their own recovery? Those are your two choices. And so we want to make sure that families are aware of that. When we look at the idea of coming together and empowering the families, this is at the crux of what it is that I do. That I want the strength of family engagement to be a huge driving force into the behaviors that we're seeing in recovery efforts. I want to maintain connection to the family so that they realize that people care about them. That even in the research that Voice and Vision was doing, that when it continued, and I didn't put it on that slide, but when they were asking their loved ones, what do you wish? What they said is that I wish my family understood this, not fixed it, not controlled it. I wish that they understood this more. I wish that they understood I wasn't trying to hurt my family. I wish that they understood that I'm trying, that I don't want this either, and that in a million years I wouldn't intentionally hurt my family, but this disease is going to hurt your family. It can't exist without it. That we want to have families to get involved, that increasing the awareness of how addiction impacts others, not in a way of like, tell them what you did and how hurtful that is. Because in early recovery, people can't maintain it. Again, it doesn't matter what you're recovering from. Mental health concerns, substance use. When somebody is moving into the new recovery, and again, I'm going to emphasize this one because it's a really profound thing, because again, this is also the only disease that everybody thinks that they're an expert in. So you go to a grocery store and somebody overhears that you've got a loved one struggling and they're like, you need to do this and you need to do that. Right? And families are just trying to figure out what they can do because they love somebody that's struggling. Understanding the impact of addiction allows for families to surrender the idea that this is personal. It allows for, and so we are a 12-step facility, and whether people go down the 12 steps or not, I'm a big supporter of whatever works to support recovery, but we do have the foundations of the 12 steps in our organization. And I always think step 9 is amends. Step 9 out of 12. Oftentimes families who are getting information from everybody around them, but the professionals, are waiting for the amends in the earliest phases of recovery. And giving them the space. So when I would say that to families, it was as if an entire lens shifted for them, because they felt like they needed to make sure that their loved ones understood all that they had done. Look what you did to me. Look what you've done to this family. Look what you've done. You need to apologize. You need to take responsibility. But amends is 9. The foundation of recovery has to be the focus in the beginning. And so I would say to families, listen, it's coming, but they need to build their recovery in order to be able to get there. It's just not today. That was a game changer for a lot of families. To recognize you're not going to get the amends. And if you're wanting to really support what recovery looks like, you don't need to remind them of everything they've done. They know. You need to be patient and support that you trust that they're going to get there. And that when they're working their full recovery program, they're going to be able to take that responsibility and accountability for the things that they did that they didn't need to do. Sharing of family insight and knowledge of history enhances the therapeutic interventions. So again, families being involved allow for the professionals to be able to understand what things we need to work on and how with that individual. Family members can be effective advocates and assist with practical tasks that are difficult for the family member during the earliest stages of recovery. Having conversations, if I hear one more person say, I got to set boundaries. How many families, when I said, what is a boundary to you? They would laugh and say, I actually don't even know. I keep getting told I have to have better ones. Nobody's even walked through what a boundary means and how it's going to be different for each and every family. So giving families practical tasks that support their recovery, but the foundation is the family's recovery. And family involvement ensures that the family and the therapist are on the same page. So again, depending on where your loved one is, depending on what your role is, when we look at sometimes in the inpatient, and you look at individuals that appropriately are trying to leave treatment early, either because the disease is speaking to them and they need to get out, or because the pink cloud is happening and they think they've got this, I don't need treatment anymore. That when you are partnering with families, it allows for you to be able to say, this is normal. And we want you to support recovery, because when we pick somebody up, when we take them out of treatment earlier, when we condone and we say those things of like, I mean, they're adults. If they need to do this, what am I going to do? You surrender that you can't control their behaviors. True. But you can be clear in what your expectations are in regards to what recovery looks like. You can change the conversation so that recovery is the priority not just the surrender of, I can't control anything, or I'm trying to control everything. It is incredibly important to connect with others experiencing a similar situation. So here's the reasons why we want families to be engaged. And again, when we do Seeds to Recovery, when we do our weekly education for our family members, or for any family members for that matter, we want families to know you're not alone. That's literally what I say to families when they reach out to me. Today, today you're no longer alone. Today, you don't have to talk to somebody that doesn't understand this and is going to try and give you, unsolicited advice. Today, you're going to be surrounded by people who understand what it is that you're going through and are going to give you the grace for you to try and figure out how to navigate this yourself. Because fundamentally, while I believe in the possibility of recovery for an individual, I believe in the foundation that families can also heal from this. But it starts with them. And that is a very different priority, because most families, all of their energy is focused in on the individual struggling. And so when I'm saying, I need you to trust me, I need you to focus in on you. I need you to make sure that your ship is solid. And the analogy that I give oftentimes is your loved one is in a ship and it has holes in it. And there's water floating in it. You are in this other ship, side by side. And what most families want to do is lean so far over their ship to pull their loved one out, that what happens is that the family falls in it too. And now both of you feel like you're sinking. The shift in the way of approaching it is when I say to the family, I need you to build your ship. I need it to be solid. I need you to be okay, to grieve the fact that you worry about your loved one, but that you identify that I can be afraid and still have hope. And when your loved one recognizes, I need to come out of the ship, and you're saying, we're here. You're not taking your boat somewhere else. You're not trying to do anything else. You're saying, I'm here. Look at, if you do some of these things, this is what's going to help you. And when your loved one extends their arm up, you pull them into your boat. When you lean too far into their addiction, you both drown. When you allow your support to stand steady because you have built the foundation of your own recovery, and you continue to say to them, I know that you're going to do this. I believe in you. Here's some things that I think might help. Step on that ladder. See if that ladder is going to help you. And when they reach up to you, you pull them in. That's the importance of the family empowerment. Be involved in the treatment. Learn about treatment options. Be knowledgeable, not to control it, but to be knowledgeable about it so that you can speak recovery. Seek well-trained and compassionate providers who are going to involve you. Set boundaries. Again, I hate the word enabling. I put it there because people keep using it. And so the words that I always say, identify which behaviors support the recovery and which protect the disease. That's the difference. But at the end of it, I don't want anybody giving up. I always want you to stay connected to your person in a way that makes sense to you, not at your expense, but in a way that makes sense to the experience that you are going through. So how do we start to help families support their loved ones? Providing education is key. This is why we have so much education that we provide where I am at RCA. Twice a week, we have educational seminars. Once a month, we do Seeds to Recovery. The ability to provide education for families to understand this so that they're hearing from the professionals and not from those that are on the street with them in the grocery store. So providing them allows them to have an understanding of, how did we get here? What can I do? What is communication? How come my communication has been so impacted? Understanding how your brain has responded to the addiction itself. Teaching skills to improve your relationships is huge, because again, the foundation of relationships oftentimes is about that struggle of like me trying to get you to do what I need you to do because I'm worried you're going to do something that could kill you, versus I got to figure myself out, because what I don't want is for you to isolate more. I need to figure out how to support the recovery and separate myself from the addiction. I need to figure out how I stay connected to you instead of either engaging in it or surrendering to it. Family sessions can help with communication and boundary setting, having honest conversations, because one family's boundary is not somebody else's. Every family has its own boundary. Seeking advice regarding relationships and how to support recovery as opposed to the crisis. That's where families get involved. When we are professionals, it needs to be identified as well that we have to appreciate other barriers that might be impacting a family's ability to get involved. And if you are a family member, to recognize, like, how do you access additional support? So if you are struggling with a lack of health care, if it's difficult for you to get to these sessions, telehealth has made this a lot more readily accessible for a lot of families. So I will say, telehealth has been a phenomenal experience. I know we have seen profound kind of opportunities to engage people that we might not have otherwise been able to engage in because they couldn't get there, because they couldn't take time off from work, but they were able to hop onto a virtual format. Look at how this is. I likely wouldn't have been able to be here if we weren't doing this through through Zoom. So it's opened up a lot of opportunities. Childcare, right? So looking at what is getting in the way. If you're not being able to get access into being a part of the recovery efforts and treatment, what's getting in the way? And that what I encourage people to do, again, if you're a provider, to ask the right questions, and if you are a family member, to share your barriers so that the problem solutions can occur that allow for everybody to come together for that long-term meaningful recovery. When we start to look at some of the takeaways for families in treatment and providers, families want to be involved and might not have the support to do so. So how do we help that? How do we help families to advocate? And again, I've always said it, my email address is open and on our website, because if a family member was like, nobody called me, I'm going to look into it. Because I want families to be able to successfully advocate for themselves. I want families to say, hey, I want to be a part of this because they're coming home to me, because I'm going to be in their life for the rest of their lives. I need to understand, in the same way that if you had a child that was recently diagnosed with diabetes, you would want somebody to start talking to you about different foods and how to diet differently and what they can and can't have so you can support it. You would want to know that you probably shouldn't go to Dunkin' Donuts every day. And so that's the importance of making sure that we're providing families opportunities to get involved. Participants need support in how to engage families in ways that are supportive and meaningful. So again, providers should be offering themselves opportunities for training. If you've got staff that are not comfortable doing, family interventions, then get yourself access to being trained. Help your staff understand how to involve families and to what degree. Fear on both sides can be one of the greatest barriers. So the family's fear and the loved ones. It is normal for a loved one to say, I don't want my family involved. As a treatment provider, that doesn't make sense. Because then I feel like I'm colluding with the disease. I know that the disease of addiction, and I know that recovery of whatever it is that somebody's trying to recover from, needs isolation. Trauma wants isolation, right? Depression wants isolation. Substance use wants isolation. So when somebody says to me, I don't want my family involved, I'm like, that doesn't make sense. That concerns me. Like, what are we worried about? Because in order for recovery to happen and be sustainable, it has to be by the people that are going to see you past when you're with me. I'm a small pebble in a vast ocean. And while maybe this is the start of the ripple, all of the rippling needs to be a part of your recovery. And so I don't want to collude with the disease. You don't need to be ashamed of anything. Your family doesn't need to be ashamed of anything. So let's start having some honest conversations. Hope sits in our ability to get additional resources to know how to support recovery. This is what we want. I want families and loved ones to believe in the possibility of hope every single day, to recognize that it's okay to be afraid and still have hope, that it's okay to be angry and still love them. Those two things do not have to go against each other. You can have both. It's okay to cry and then laugh. When we have families that come and join us for, again, when we did live Seeds to Recovery, when we were doing live visitation, Even the simple things of saying, when you see your loved one, you don't need to talk about the addiction. That's our job. You just talk to them like they're loved ones that they are to you. What's going on over the weekend? What football team's playing? What are they wanting to do moving forward? Because we are all much bigger than the biggest crisis that we're facing. And we want them to be reminded of that. So you can feel anger. Sometimes people are like, well, I don't want to condone this. That's boundaries. Because you don't need to say it's okay for them to engage in these behaviors for them to do it. They don't want to anyway. That's their recovery. They're trying to learn new ways to be able to get through that. So families don't need to remind them of everything that they need to do differently. They know. That's their treatment. Remind them of who they are. Families are incredibly resilient. And with the support of providers, they can make powerful changes in the way that we interact. Powerful changes can happen because, again, depending on what somebody's trying to recover from, there's going to be certain expectations. I always think of, and again, I know that I'm focusing a lot on substance use because it's where I'm certainly sitting in the treatment space right now. But again, spent years in the behavioral health field. Is that, I remember sharing with families just post-acute withdrawal. So their loved one goes into treatment. Everybody thinks, especially today when we're seeing so many people being impacted with substance use in light of COVID for the first time having to enter treatment. And they have this idea that when they get into their recovery, everything is going to be better. They're going to be better. We're going to be better. Everybody's going to be happy. But when somebody experiences post-acute withdrawal, they're actually not. The earliest phases of recovery is difficult. They're not happier. They're grateful that they're in recovery, but it's hard. And they're more irritable. They might feel more depressed. There might be more moodiness in the experiences. It might seem that they don't love being with the family. And if the family doesn't understand that, they actually think it's them. I don't think they love me anymore. I don't think they want to be here anymore. They seem like they hate being around me. And when you say that's normal, that's called post-acute withdrawal. They're struggling to just get the neurotransmitters in their brain to be changed and elevated. What do we do then? And I'm like, continue what you're doing. Love them and allow the acceptance of where they are in that space, because their brain is under a lot of reconstruction and trying to figure out how to get through these early phases. So don't personalize it. You don't need to say like, oh my God, they seem agitated, they're going to use, right? That's our own anxiety. Just be there. Just be there. So the Serenity Prayer. So I will say, and this will be, our last slide, and then I'm going to they will introduce the next speaker. So the Serenity Prayer is one that we provide to our patients a lot. And anybody that's in recovery, it doesn't, again, matter what they're in recovery for. This is a foundation. But again, spending so much of my time working with families, it's always become a really big priority for me to talk about the Serenity Prayer for our families. Because when we think about it, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. When we think about this in light of family members, the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Our families cannot change that their loved ones are struggling with whatever it is that they are trying to recover from, substance use, mental health. You can't yell it out of them. You can't squeeze it out of them. You can't force the provider to get it out of them. What you can do is find the courage to change the things that you can. The courage to change the things that you can is you. It's the way that you communicate. It's the way that you've identified what are your boundaries. It's the way that we support families in the recovery process to help them to understand. Because sometimes what we'll hear is providers that are saying, well, I told the family that they should stop doing that, and they still do it. Sure, that makes sense. We see that with our own patients that struggle with substance use, even though they know they shouldn't, or struggle with the behaviors associated with their mental health. Treatment is about seeing through that and saying, okay, you hit a bump, let's keep going. The courage to change the things that you can, that's treatment. Families need to recognize the necessity of their own treatment. And again, whether that's Al-Anon, whether that's programs like this, whether that's the educational seminars that we offer, whether that is participating in other opportunities, the only thing that families have control over is themselves. But they are geared towards the crisis of the addiction, and without treatment providers including them, without families advocating for the inclusion of themselves in the treatment services, they won't know how to change the things that they can, and they will be stuck on line 2 because they will have not accepted that they cannot change their loved one. It's not how this works. So the wisdom to know the difference is being able to recognize, what do I have power over? It's you. And what do I need to do to support my loved one's journey? That's the shift. So with that, I am going to stop. Oh, I'm not going to stop sharing my screen yet.
Wow, Trish, thank you so much. I'm almost speechless, really. I'll tell you, just to hear the beginning about learning a new language of recovery and not crisis, amazing. Your presentation brought help, hope, and healing, I'm sure, as we learned about not to have the shame and the blame and to build our ship. I know sometimes I felt like I was in a little rowboat. But, as I built that ship with other supports around me, professionals, family members, Al-Anon, and my faith and other things, then my ship was bigger. But wow, just amazing. Thank you so much. And Trish, you'll be here. You'll stay on. And at the end of Kathleen's presentation, we're going to have Q&A. So we're going to be answering questions. We'll probably have about a half an hour for that. And we'll ask you to put all your questions in the Q&A. And Trish will be here to answer more questions. So thank you so much. We need healing, we need recovery, we need the language, we need the tools. And Help and Hope, our book, lots of tips in there, stories, personal stories. And Kathleen is one of the contributors, as was Trish, to our Help and Hope guide. So I'd like to introduce Kathleen Morris Rosati to you right now. Professionally, Kathleen has over 40 years of experience in human resources with insurance, manufacturing, and healthcare organizations. She is currently the Assistant Vice President of Human Resources at the Philadelphia Contributionship. Kathleen has also served as an adjunct professor teaching human resources related courses. Kathleen is a ministry leader with a FIRE, which stands for Active Faith Implementing Relief in the Epidemic, at St. Peter and Paul Parish in Westchester. She is a mother of 3 adult children and proud grandmother of 10 grandchildren. Kathleen authored the opening guest contribution in Voice Mission's Help and Hope book on substance use with her article, The Man with the Orange Bucket. This piece was originally published in her personal blog, Reflections of a Recovery Mom. Welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you so much, Valerie. And thank you, Trish. That was a great presentation. And I wish I had met you 10 years ago. And when you hear my story, maybe you'll see why. So substance abuse is a family disease. One person may use, but the entire family suffers. In my family, I now have 3 adult children. They're all in their 40s. My oldest son is a police officer. My daughter's a nurse. My youngest son is a skilled tradesman who happens to suffer from the disease of substance use. I'm going to be speaking to you from my experience as a mom, but certainly I recognize that family members have varied experiences. They include dads, grandparents, spouses, siblings, adult children, significant others, friends. So, and the truth that I know about all of these people along the way that I've met in my journey is that family members generally want to help. We genuinely want to help our loved one, but often we don't know where to go or how to begin, or as Trish said, how to speak that language. We have to learn. Let me tell you a little bit about my family's background. When my children were growing up, we were a typical suburban family. My kids went to good schools. We went to church every Sunday together as a family. They played sports. They had good friends. We were a close-knit family with strong family values and a big extended family that got together regularly. I never thought that addiction would impact my family. If you had told me 10 years ago what we would be going through, I would have thought you were crazy. And consequently, when it did become clear that my son had a problem, I was completely unaware of what to do and where to turn. But I can tell you that one of the things that I've learned along the way is the first step in ending the stigma and shame that sometimes comes along with this disease is learning that it's important to talk about it and to share your experience with others. And so I hope my family's story will be of a little bit of help to you. I first realized that my son had a substance use issue about 11 years ago. He had a serious injury, had surgery, and was prescribed pain medication. At the time, I was not aware of just how easily pain medications, especially opioids, could lead to an addiction. And I certainly didn't realize that taking pain medication often leads to use of heroin. I certainly did not understand the complex disease that has physical, psychological, social, emotional complexities. But what I did know was that I was watching my son change in front of my eyes, and I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't understand how my loving son had become so unreliable, defensive, untrustworthy, angry, on edge, how he had stopped attending our family gatherings. And if he did show up, he would often leave abruptly. Why he never had enough money, why he was having car accidents, and what had happened to all of his old good friends. I got the answer one day when my phone rang, and his wife told me that he had been arrested, and that at the time of his arrest, he had multiple bags of heroin with him. In the years since that arrest, which was back in 2013, our family has gone through the roller coaster, the nightmare of legal, financial problems, incarcerations, treatment programs, relapses. Our family has experienced what every family experiences going through this: chaos, worry, anger, disappointment, resentment, fear, and many shattered dreams and broken hearts. But there's also been an awful lot of learning, growth, and new friends along the way. You know, Trish ended with the Serenity Prayer, and that really hits home with me, because 10 years ago, when I first found out what was going on with my son, I realized I'm a fixer. My typical approach is to dive in and change everything, fix everything, cure everything. So I don't usually have trouble finding the courage to change the things I can, because I think I can do it. For me, it's about finding the serenity to accept what I cannot change, and especially the wisdom to know the difference that trips me up. So what did I do? I began doing some research, and I found a weekly family group that met in Washington Township, New Jersey. And I started to attend, naively thinking that I could quickly get answers, I'd find the cure, and I'd get our family back to normal in short order. I had no idea what I was getting myself into and the journey I was about to go on. But week after week, I drove to New Jersey. I sat in a church basement with people who were also struggling with substance use disorder and their family members, all in the same meeting at the same time. Many of their stories were similar to mine and my son's. What a comfort to know I wasn't going through this alone. They were facing the same issues, feeling similar emotions, and they were willing to share their experience, strength, and hope with us. My son, who attended with me. And what we realized was the discussions that took place there were often raw. They were often tragic. Sometimes they were funny. We actually learned to laugh together. But they were always honest, and they were real, and they were compassionate. It was a group of people trying to learn to do the right thing to help their loved one. The counselor who ran that group explained that the power of the group came from having those who were struggling with substance use and their family members in the same meeting together. Let me tell you a little bit about how that would work. I would go to the meeting and I would listen to another parent's child describe their demons and what they were trying to do to conquer them. And my heart would be touched. My son, on the other hand, got to see and experience firsthand the anguish of other parents and their frustrations of not being able to control their loved one's disease or just get them to stop using. By listening to others, my son and I gained insight into each other's perspective without the emotional barrier that often blocked our ability to listen and understand each other directly. This group also helped me gradually learn that I couldn't fix or cure my son. That work was his. They helped me to learn to focus on myself and my other extended family members so that we could better support each other and learn from other parents what had worked or not worked for them. It gave me new tools and, as Trish said, a new language. I was so glad to hear Trish say that she hates the word enabling, because one of the big dilemmas that I've gone through, and I know other parents have as well, is this challenge of, as Trish says, staying connected to the person but disconnecting from the disease. And I'm sure there are plenty of well-meaning people who talk to us about tough love, about enabling, about you have to let them hit bottom. And that's an area where I think most families need the most guidance. I know I did. I needed to learn to say no more often. Of course I did. And I needed to learn to stop rescuing my son from the consequences of his choices. But just as important, I needed non-judgmental support to guide me in how to continue loving my son, how to provide guidance and assistance when he was ready to make positive change, and to play an appropriate role in his recovery. Trish, I loved your example of the boat. I guess what I did was, over the years, I learned to stop leaning into his boat and start inviting him into mine. You're so right when you point out that substance use disorder is a disease of isolation. Families need help in being able to recognize the difference between alienating and isolating their loved one even further, but maintaining loving communication and contact that encourages that recovery. Let me give you a practical example, and this is probably one that if you are a family member, you've probably experienced it. You know, as a mom, I think one of the worst things is worrying about, does my son have enough to eat? And if he calls me and says, I haven't eaten in 2 days and I have no money to buy food, my tendency is going to be to hand him the money so that he can eat. Well, one of the things I learned was that if I handed him money, he probably wasn't going to buy food. So I switched to gift cards, and then I realized that he wasn't even using the gift cards to buy food. And so I finally settled on the solution of, when he called and told me that he hadn't eaten in 2 days, maybe the better approach was to pick a time and a place to meet him and have a meal together. That way I could watch him eat, we'd have some time together, we could connect, and maybe just for a half hour, life would feel a little bit normal for him again. Think of it this way. If your child were diabetic and they started begging you for candy, you wouldn't hand it over to them. I had to learn that lesson in dealing with my son with substance use. So the more family members who become involved in understanding this disease and its baffling array of destructive behaviors, the greater the chance that the entire family can present a united front. In my case, it's often been my other son and my daughter and other family members who have stepped in to support me and remind me to kind of stick to my way of doing things. Trish mentioned the benefits and barriers to family involvement in recovery. And in preparation for today's presentation, I started asking some of the people in my network what barriers they've experienced. I'm going to share with you a few that they brought up. First of all, and this is a very practical one, of course, is the expense of getting someone into treatment, especially if they have no private insurance. And many times the person is at a point in their substance use where perhaps they've lost a job and they've lost their benefits. There is Medicaid available, of course, but sometimes there's some bureaucracy involved in getting enrolled. And oftentimes, because of privacy laws, it's the person themselves that has to make the application. And yet they're at a point in their addiction where they're incapable of handling even the simplest of tasks. So that can be kind of a catch-22. I mean, once they get into treatment, there are some really good social workers that can help connect them with the services. But in those very early stages, having a family member get involved can really be helpful. But there are many obstacles that have to be overcome there. Another thing that gets mentioned quite often is the length of stay. Many treatment programs are based on a 28-day model, unfortunately, because that's usually the amount of inpatient work that an insurance company will pay for. But we all know that 28 days will not, it will start to create a foundation, but it will not put someone into good, solid recovery. And as Trish pointed out, once the patient leaves the inpatient setting and goes on to next steps, they're returning to whatever their next normal life is going to be. And the role of the family is even more critical. In my son's case, he had several periods of being incarcerated, and that presents even new challenges and obstacles. And unfortunately, the criminal justice system is not always in tune with helping the person with the substance disease get involved in a treatment program. Knowing where to turn when those moments of crisis happen, when there's an overdose, when there's severe mental health behaviors, when there are perhaps medical complications of the disease. Mostly the advice is call 911 or go to an ER. But ER personnel are sometimes not trained or inclined to deal with substance use and all of its complex issues. Another thing that I found is that facilities need to be ready to admit when the person with substance use disorder decides to seek treatment. They need to be ready to seize the moment, because if we let that moment pass, we know all too well that the person might not be ready tomorrow. Another thing that I was not prepared for was, and it would be helpful if the providers working with families could do more to prepare us for the possibility or even the probability of relapse. Continued family support after rehab is especially problematic if the person leaves treatment without against medical advice. In some programs, the support to the family stops then as well. Better discharge planning and communication with the family, especially about recovery houses and different ways of living, would be very helpful, a very helpful part of the education. In my experience, we've had some really good experience with some faith-based programs. The New Jersey family group that I mentioned early on was one of those, and a long-term Christian recovery program that my son was recently part of have been able to provide some of the things that I just talked about. As Trish said, there's no one way, no one size fits all. Every family is going to have to find their own way. But I will tell you, and unfortunately, there are some unscrupulous people in every field. Beware of the quick fix, the free or the too good to be true offers. Affiliate yourself with people that are well-trained in dealing with this disease. Develop a network. People that have shared experiences that can support you, that can point you to access to resources, that can tell you what worked for them, that can help you steer clear of places and people that will not lead your loved one to recovery. And get involved in a recovery community. There are many ways to get involved and to give back. Lastly, the tragic reality is this disease can be fatal. Far too many have died already, leaving their family members filled with grief and possibly guilt. Those people desperately need our service, support, and compassion. In closing, I'm happy to tell you that at least for today, and hopefully for good, my son is in recovery. He's living in a faith-based sober living house. He's working. He's become a member of his church community, and he's rebuilding his life. As a family, we still have much healing to do. I pray every day for my family and for all families who are dealing with this disease, and with much gratitude to everyone who has helped us in our journey. Thank you very much.
Kathleen, thank you so much for your powerful story. Thank you for sharing your vulnerability. Thank you for telling us that we can't fix this or cure it, but we can get help ourselves as family members, that it's about getting our help, getting our support, and being there to love our loved one. I know someone wrote in the book that tough love for them stood for to offer understanding, grace, and hope, the word tough. So it really sounds like you were there, you learned a lot. And I love the fact that you talked about the group that you were involved in, that you got to hear other people's stories, and that really helped you. And you got to even hear the story of the person who had the disease, and you could understand your son a little better, even if it wasn't the exact same thing. And he could do the same by hearing other family members. That is so key, that we hear the voice of other families and people walking through this together. So please, again, Voice and Vision, our Help and Hope Guide has lots of stories in there that of people that have walked the walk, and you'll be able to do that. So now it's time for questions and comments. Please put it in the Q&A, and we will bring them up to Trish and to Kathleen. Also, perhaps you're a family member or you're a provider that have other ways that you have learned to either engage people or to tell your story or to connect with families. We'd love to hear your resources as well. And this will, let me see, the one question we have already is, will this recording be available? Absolutely. This recording will be available on our website very shortly. I can't give you an exact time frame. We hope within 2 weeks. But please, if you'd like to see it again, refer it out. It will be available on our website, as is our Help and Hope Guide. All right, we have another question here. Do you have a list of books for professionals and families on this topic? It would be great to continue professional development as well for the family to continue, continue their own growth. So are there other books, are there books out there that we can recommend? I will say that, this is what I was supposed to say at the end, but I'll say it here. We do have a resource sheet that will be going out with information after this about how you can access the webinar on our website. But do you, Kathleen or Trish, know of any good books or any good resources that we can recommend right now?
I can speak to some of it off the top of my head. So I think probably what would be best is that we do have on our website. So I've put a list of recommended books. And I can certainly share that with this group, and then you would be able to distribute it to whoever you wanted to. But I had compiled books. Again, I'm not a fan of recommending books that I haven't read myself, to make sure that they're appropriate for the family's experience, and kind of even the levels of where families are in their own recovery process. So I can share that. I don't have that off the top of my head, but there is a number of really great books. And again, I will say some of the books are easier for families that are in the newest phases of recovery, and some are more appropriate for families that have sustained some level of recovery in their experiences. You know, I think it's respectful and important for a family to recognize where they are, because sometimes you can read something that's too raw. And while the intention is to provide some support, it can feel too vulnerable in the moment. And so I normally kind of stage the books in regards to those stages of recovery, but I can share that. I can share that with you, Valerie.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. I'd like to remind everybody about our Help and Hope Guide too. And Help and Hope has stories as well as information in there, how to navigate the system, prevention. What if someone's been using substances? What kind of nutrients do you need for your brain to heal? So there's a lot of different information in here as well. on recovery, on prevention, on intervention. And so please we also have at the very end resources in your own county. If you're from another county or maybe even another state that is, our book is not listed the resources, then we'll even help you find resources. So, okay, let's see, other questions or comments? We have a comment here. Thanks to all. These presentations and discussion have been incredibly helpful. Very well done. Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments? Here we go. Thank you very much. Are any Recovery Centers of America educational or family support programs available to family members other than those of their own clients and consumers?
Yes. So we, again, while I'm overseeing all the clinical in our complete enterprise, the families have always been a very strong focal point for me. So all of our family resources are available to everyone. So we certainly have that for our own families, but we actually want to be a part of the community solution and the support that all families need. So all of our Tuesday evening webinars are free of charge for anybody. Our Seeds to Recovery is free of charge, open to anybody that's been impacted. And that's a little bit different because that one, it's a little bit longer. It's on a Saturday morning. And we actually have the integration of those that have maintained their own recovery. So families might share stories, loved ones might share stories, and then we interface that with some of the experts in the field. So we actually have about 6 or 7 speakers. The Tuesday is straight education, opportunities to ask questions of the professionals. We have a rotating one on Thursday evening. One is on MAT, one is specifically for families of young adults, and one is for our first responder families, so that they have their own unique place and safe place that they're able to communicate with other families of first responders. All of those are free. In addition, we just launched, and so I'm so proud of the work that they're doing. We launched on Shout Out a family educational group. And so these do have a nominal fee associated with them. They are both all of the groups are facilitated by marriage and family therapists who work and specialize in the field of substance use. And so we have one that just started on the families impacted by addiction and the learning a new language of recovery. We have one that's geared towards speaking to your children about recovery and how to have that conversation. So my child, our family, our recovery. We'll be launching one on couples in recovery. So we're continuing to build opportunities for families, both for free resources, as well as that would be a little bit more individualized, which is what the Shout Out offerings are. It's a smaller group, it's 8 at max. So families really have an opportunity to ask the experts to develop their own kind of community. But all the free resources are available to everybody. And it's a much larger scale. So we might have 85 people or, more attending those, but straight educational and support.
That's great. Thank you, Trish. And we would recommend at Voice and Vision that if your loved one is using substances or has a mental health challenge, that you would talk to the provider themselves to see what they have to offer, where your loved one is, your local providers. Let your insurance company know you want to see this at the providers. Let your providers know you need it. It's very, very important. And then connecting with other family members in some way, and that usually through Al-Anon, or there are other things, as Kathleen mentioned, several groups there. So it's really important to get that education and that hope. And there are people in the local area and providers that provide that. So let your voice be heard that you need it, that it's important. We have another question here, and we talked to how to engage families and all. Well, what if the individual and the family, the relationship is severed and both sides don't want to work together? What do you suggest someone does about that?
On our end, and again, certainly we're always about the reconnection and the healing of family members, but we recognize that appropriate boundaries might be set for either, where they are focusing in on their own recovery efforts. If we have an individual that comes into treatment that does not currently have any family, and so again, to me, family is whoever has your back outside of our own treatment space. If they don't have access to that, what we are organized to do is connect them to what we would consider kind of their new recovery family. So we have a very robust alumni program. And so again, I would recommend that to your point, Valerie, if wherever somebody is getting access to treatment, whether it's you or whether it's a family member, speak to your provider. But we have a very robust alumni. So sometimes we do have individuals that are coming in and they have severed ties with family members or vice versa. And so we connect them to our alumni services. We connect them to local sponsorship because we know that recovery efforts are strengthened when there is support on behalf of the person, particularly as they go through a continuum of treatment. To Kathleen's point, treatment doesn't end after the 30 days of an inpatient stay, right? That's the beginning of the recovery journey. And we want to make sure that there's those in the recovery efforts to support that long-term meaningful recovery. So if it's not a family member they've identified, then it can be alumni, it can be sponsorship. So I think it's important for providers to connect to those local organizations, make sure that they have some access to being able to identify individuals so that when somebody discharges in any level of care, that they have a supportive network that will continue to support them as they navigate their own recovery.
Yeah, and I would add there, Trish, that another avenue for people who don't have traditional family support is turn to your churches, turn to your church community. There are many, many faith-based organizations out there that will take you in and provide family support, and you become their family.
Absolutely. I could not agree more.
That's a great idea. And in some cultures, like with people who are Black and African American, we found as we gather data, and thank you for using our data, Trish, we continue to gather data on family engagement, and we have a much broader view right now. But we found out that people in certain cultures use their church or go to their church or faith groups first or their community first. So
Yes.
that is a very good resource for people to look into. Kathleen, what would you tell a family member has a family member with substance use and they can't have access, or the family doesn't want to talk to them, or how would you encourage that family member, support them?
Let me make sure I understand the question, Valerie. Are you asking me what advice would I give to the family, or what advice would I give to the individual?
To the family. If family says, I really want to have connection with my son or daughter or sister, mother, father, and there's not a connection there, what would you suggest for them to do while that relationship is currently severed?
Sure. There's many things you can do, and timing is everything. Recognize that your loved one is working through some of their own issues. If they're in the hands of good professionals, those professionals will guide them back to the relationships that are important in their life. In the meantime, take care of yourself. Get involved in some of the support groups, some of the things that we've been talking about. One other thing that I didn't mention, and I don't usually suggest this to people in very early stages of dealing with their loved one in recovery, but eventually you can become a great advocate for changing laws, for changing the way we deal with things. Some of these barriers that we talked about used to be a lot worse, and many things have changed for the better in the last 10 years. And a lot of that is as a result of family members getting involved in advocacy. So there's plenty of things you can do while you wait for that moment to reconnect.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kathleen. And one thing we can do as family members is call the professional and let them know our story. We don't have to say anything about the individual per se. They're not allowed to say anything to us, but we can say whatever we want to them. So hopefully they take your call, and that can be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. And we encourage too. I mean, so sometimes there's family members that are trying to call, again, to identify what's going on or to ask questions. And certainly as a provider, we can only provide information if we have that release of information signed. But to your point, a family member can still call and leave a message to a therapist, and we can hear the information that's being given to us. Additionally, it lets us know that there's a family member that's involved. And so that might prompt a conversation, because again, we might not even know that there's a mother, father, sister, brother. So we only know about the family members that a patient reports to us. So if a sister leaves a voicemail, we know a sister is involved, and we can have a different level of conversation with that patient. And what we also encourage families to do is sometimes, and again, this is a part of what we see, sometimes a loved one in treatment will not sign a release of information, but will continue to contact their family member. So in the evenings, they're calling their family, but they're not signing a release for us to contact it, right? So that's perpetuating the cycle of addiction. So they have full control. I connect to you, but I don't want treatment to have a conversation. So we take that very seriously, in making sure that we're having honest conversations with our patients about that. But we also encourage family members to recognize, if you hear that, you call a site and they say, I can't confirm or deny your loved one's presence, and then your loved one calls you that night, you can say, you know what, I'm learning my own recovery, and I want to be a part of your recovery, not a part of the chaos. And so if you want me to continue to receive your phone calls in the evenings, or provide you cigarettes, or, send you things, I would like for you to call with a treatment member of the team. And so it allows for the families to have honest conversations. And that's, I think, getting families to be informed and educated. They have some of their own ability to identify how they want to be involved. And so if you're only hearing from your loved one and not treatment, you can have an honest conversation about what you want to do in regards to that as well.
Thank you. That's excellent. We have a comment here. Thank you both so very much for your insightful presentations. Family engagement is so important, and education is power. Thank you for giving families hope, realizing and being afraid is a part of that. Also, someone asked a question if we're going to give a certificate for this training. We generally don't. However, if you would like a certificate of participation, please send us an email to that effect, and you'll have the email address from Maria at the end of this. We have another question. Can you please address the stigma that people feel which discourages them from sharing with others, faith communities, families, whomever, their job, whomever? How do you address that stigma?
Let me comment on that one. One of the things, particularly in church faith communities, I do recognize that sometimes it is difficult to take that first step. If you know the people, if they're your neighbors, it is a difficult thing. So sometimes people will look for a church group in a neighboring community. I know I see this a lot in Catholic parishes, where perhaps you don't want to turn to your own parish, but there's a neighboring parish where maybe you don't know as many people that has a support group. So that can be very helpful. There are other churches that have programs called Celebrate Recovery. So there are many, many resources outside your immediate church community if you feel a little bit hesitant in the early stages. I will say, the more you get involved, the stigma starts to lessen. You get a little bit more courage. And my experience has been every single person that I have ever spoken with, whether it's people at work, whether it's people in my neighborhood or my church, they all amazingly have a story of their own. This, we talk about pandemics. Substance use is a real epidemic, and everyone knows someone that's been impacted by it. And so usually it's a sense of relief. People are happy to share their story with you.
That's great. Thank you so much. So basically, I've heard that from other people too. As soon as you say something, there's almost everyone that's been touched by this in some way. So if you have a trusted friend or you can mention it, you'll hear a story back. That's partly what you're saying, Kathleen. So sharing is essential with trusted people. Thank you. We do have a question. How do we help guide a loved one to a competent, qualified, experienced therapist? Is there a network or list of reviewed therapists? And I know in particular, we've had people who don't want to go the professional route or go to a therapist. How do we overcome that? And how do we find someone who's really good and that can engage families?
I mean, I think that there's some ways, depending on the level of care and the level of service that's being sought after, when you're going to providers, you can ask about the level of involvement of families. You can call different facilities, you can call different providers to say, do you involve family members? How are they involved? Do you have services that would be accessible for us as well? So I always encourage families to do that as you're looking for it. So that's one thing. Identifying a therapist, is a little bit different. And so there's different there's different networks. Psychology Today sometimes will publish and they identify like what some of the key subject areas of that therapist. I'm a fan of saying that people should trust their own instincts. So if you meet a provider that you don't feel or trust, or you just get a sense, I believe people should stick with their intuition and follow that. You want somebody that you feel comfortable with and that you feel connected with, or the ability to be connected. If it's how do you get your loved one to access treatment, that's where that becomes a little bit sticky. So I think, my suggestion has always been for a family member, if you're worried about your family member and you want them to access treatment, that's the Serenity Prayer, right? You can't control their decisions, but you can take back the power for yourself. You can access your own treatment, and that might help you to guide the way that you want to respond. It might help you to set a boundary that you feel you need to set in regards to your loved one's relationship with you and how you do that. I think, Kathleen said it well. There's a lot of information about, tough love, which I'm not a fan of, because I think that it is, identifying, what you do and don't have control over. That Serenity Prayer is incredibly powerful for families, but it also, we know that, sometimes somebody will say, well, I'm only going to treatment because of you. And I'm like, terrific, right? I love that. Because we think that if they say they're only going for you, or they say they're not ready, that they can't have recovery. And actually that goes against what research says. So they don't need to hit rock bottom. And again, to these days, rock bottom is dead, right? Fentanyl is pervasive and it's across kind of all substance of choice. So we don't wait for rock bottom. And so it's recognizing that the relationship is oftentimes the reasons why somebody might access help. And so if you can't control another human being, but if you are struggling as a family member and trying to figure out, well, how do I acknowledge this? Then start with you. Join different groups, get a faith-based group, join Al-Anon, attend these educational seminars, get involved, because you'll start to navigate the ways that you can best support yourself, which will then help you to figure out how to support them.
Thank you, Trish. I have to say, in my own situation, when I got help for me, my life changed dramatically. And one of the persons in my life said, oh my gosh, I need help. Because I didn't scream, you lousy alcoholic anymore, or tell that person everything he did wrong. I was better and I responded differently. I learned different coping mechanisms, and that allowed that person to have space to even get help. That's what I felt. And it changed. Correct. The change was dramatic. So we do, as we get our own help as family members, it really can make an impact. And again, yes. I think Trish and both Kathleen said earlier, we can encourage with set boundaries, but we can still be there to encourage and to offer grace and to offer kindness. And Kathleen talked about how she then met her son for lunch to give quality time instead of handing over money. So correct. It's very important that you get the help that you need. A comment came through too from someone who's a certified recovery specialist and found this invaluable. And I do want to mention that we hadn't mentioned that there are certified recovery specialists now that are paid for and in the system. Mm-hmm. And those individuals are people who are in recovery from substance use, and they're certified peer specialists in the mental health world. And so they can help your loved one walk through their recovery and help to guide and be a support. They're not like a sponsor with 12-step, but they're similar, and they can walk along beside. And that is actually a paid treatment service in the Medicaid world, medical assistance, but you can also get it at, I'm sure, at Recovery Centers for America and other places where there's private insurance as well. And now we're moving to certified family recovery specialists, where people that have been family members who have walked this will help other family members. So that's very helpful to know. We have another comment that says, thank you so much to Trish for the help that you're doing with families and all the work to make this better. And thank you to Kathleen for sharing your experiences as a parent. I found this very encouraging for my own journey with my loved one in recovery. So thank you for that. We're out of time to close now. If you did not get a chance to ask your question, or you have any comments, you can please send something to Maria. email us there, mariam@voiceandvisioninc.org. Or maybe your question was too personal and you didn't want to share it. Please, we will entertain your questions afterwards. I'd like you to know that you'll be receiving a feedback form to an email that you provided to sign on. So we want to let you have you let us know what we can do better. And also, what other topics would you like to hear in the future? We also want to let you know again that this recording will be on our website, on our events page. If you have any questions, if you have any ways that we can help you navigate, we do have people here that have walked the walk at Voice and Vision, and we can connect you to other folks. Just if you just want to, maybe you've never connected before or you're at a standstill, we'd be happy to help you. And once again, we have many tips in our guide. There will be tips on our web sheet. When we send you a follow-up email, we will send you a resource sheet as well. And then again, our Help and Hope guide is on our website. So thank you so much for attending today. Trish, Kathleen, thank you for your information. It was inspiring. It was helpful. I'm cheering today. Voice and Vision will continue to gather data around family engagement. So look for a blog coming up with some of our upcoming data, with some of the data that we've gathered in the last couple of years. So we thank you for that, and we're here to help. Have a wonderful day. And remember, recovery's possible. And yes, recovery works, and not just for the individual, but with the family. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. And thank you to Magellan. I can't forget that, who sponsored this. Bye-bye, everyone.